Hi, welcome to Murder, Mystery and Mayhem's first live. We're very fortunate to have as our first guest a pre-recorded interview with Leeza Peters, the writer and producer of the stage play Shadows of Death, the story of the life and death of Elizabeth Woolcock, the only woman to be hanged in South Australia. Okay, welcome Leeza, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim. I look forward to having our chat.
Yep, no problem. So just for the people that aren't familiar with the case, if you could just perhaps give us a quick recap on Elizabeth's story.
Oh, Elizabeth's story has been around my family for about 40 years, so there's a lot to tell. Her whole story is one of a tragic childhood, and which she ended up marrying a widower, Thomas Woolcock. He subsequently died. She was blamed for his death for poisoning him with mercury, and although there's a lot of circumstances believing us to that she may be actually innocent. So, it's been my father's quest and my quest to provide the story as best we can. My dad's actually written 2 books on her story, and I'm just completing another book after doing 2 plays on her story and a short film sections.
Yes. Your dad's first book was called?
The first book was No Monument of Stone, and the subsequent book was when he got a publisher on board and he produced Dead Woman Walking.
Okay, and for those that are interested in buying the book, they can get that straight through Bass Publishing?
Bass Publishing, yes, that's correct.
I can leave a link underneath here with the details for that.
Yep.
Yep, and he also submitted 2 petitions to have the conviction overturned.
Yes, when he found some more evidence to prove that she may not be guilty, he found a letter from a chemist called William I, and he actually wrote to the Governor Musgrave at the time, just after Elizabeth was convicted and was to be hung, and he found that in this, the letter states about 26 reasons why she should not be hanged, and why she could be not guilty. And subsequently to that, the executive committee with Governor Musgrave got someone else to respond to that letter and basically still went ahead with the hanging.
It's a very sad case, isn't it? From her birth right through to her hanging.
Yes.
She didn't have a very good childhood, did she?
No, she was born in Borough in 1848, and she was actually left without, after the death of both her brother and a sister in the Ballarat goldfields. Her mother left her at the age of 4, and so she was to be raised by her father. Because he was out mining all day in the gold mine, she was actually attacked and raped and left for dead when she was 7 years old. She then had to get her own living until she was about 16. She actually heard her mother was alive and living in Moonta. So she decided to go and live with her mother and her new stepfather and see what life would lead there.
Moonta is part of the Copper Coast area in South Australia. It's about 165 kilometres north of Adelaide. The whole area was nicknamed Little Cornwall because of the Cornish immigrants who came there to work the copper mines during the 1800s.
That's correct.
I think one of the copper mines in Wallaroo is actually a tourist attraction now. So if anyone in South Australia is interested in coming up to that area and having a look around, it's quite interesting, and they'll be able to visit the copper mines and everything there.
Yep.
And also due to the rape and attack, she was unable to have children.
Yeah, that's right.
And also became addicted to painkillers or opioids.
Well, she did take some medication, obviously, and it wasn't till later. I mean, a lot of the drugs that you can get are over the counter. Laudanum was just available for all sorts of things, like for a cold or sore throat, period pain even. So That's all those sort of addictions started that way.
Yeah, it's and then she spent some time in a brothel, not as a prostitute, but she worked in amongst prostitutes, I believe.
Well, that's part of a story, yeah.
Right, okay. And then fortunately she found her mother and
Yeah.
thought she was going to start a new life. And yeah, how did she come into contact with Thomas Woolcock?
Well, for the first couple of years while she was at Moonta, when she first went to live with her mother and stepfather, she was having a good time. She was actually enjoying life. And she actually became a teacher at the Wesleyan Church. There she actually got to meet a lot of the young kids. She really associated well with children. And she met a young boy called Thomas John Woolcock, or Tommy. And so then she found out that he was actually the young son of a man called Thomas Woolcock, who was a recent widower. His wife and other young son had died only 8 months earlier. So she took pity on him and thought she'd help him out by cleaning the house and looking after the Thomas John. And until someone told her stepfather about her keeping company with him, he took it the wrong way and threatened to cripple her if she continued to see him. So the stepfather knew that he was actually a bit of a drinker and a gambler, and forbid her to see him. So that was the start of it. And then the next Sunday morning, well, basically when she told Thomas what happened with her stepfather, he suggested they get married. So they married the next Sunday morning.
How long were they married before Thomas became ill?
He became ill in 1873. He came home ill from work at the mine. He was sick in June, and then July he called on Dr. Bull, who was a mine doctor, free services. He started treating him. This is in July. And just said he had a sore throat and fever. So he was treating him with pills. Now, some of those pills and medication, some of those pills actually had mercury in them. Then when Thomas complained that the medication was making him sick, he asked for another doctor. He didn't want Dr. Bull anymore because he said the medication made him sick. So the next doctor was another mine surgeon, and his name was Dr. Dickey. Dr. Dickey started treating him for gastric fever. That doctor then didn't return, so they called in a third doctor, Dr. Herbert. It was Dr. Herbert that discovered, this is on the 2nd of August. Dr. Herbert said that he was suffering from salivation of mercury poisoning, and started treating him for that. And within 13 days, Thomas started to recover. However, Dr. Herbert was not a mine surgeon, so he had to pay for his services, which Thomas Woolcock didn't like very much. So he was quite a Scrooge with money, and decided to go back to Dr. Dickey. And Dr. Dickey came in, even though he had heard from Herbert that it was salivation by mercury poisoning, he still continued to treat him for gastric fever. And subsequently, after his medication, Thomas Woolcock died on the 4th of September, 1873.
There was a boarder that lived with Elizabeth and Thomas for a little while.
That's correct. They took him after Thomas and Elizabeth had a few fights. In fact, he did treat her fairly badly. She tried to leave him twice, and then Thomas kept finding her and getting her back home. Then she tried to take her own life a couple of times, and when that didn't help, they brought in a boarder to ease the tension and also helped with financial difficulties. Tom Pascoe was the boarder. He was quite a nice guy, young guy, and Thomas and Elizabeth both got along really well with him, and Thomas John took to him extremely well too. So it was actually good for a couple of months. However, there was a fight between Thomas and Pascoe, because Pascoe didn't get up early enough to help Woolcock search for his horse that was let out accidentally the night before. So then he, in a rage, told Pascoe to leave and never return. It was soon after that Thomas Woolcock's dog, pet dog, died, and he claimed to the Sergeant Bentley, that the dog was poisoned by Tom Pascoe.
Gossip started in the town about a possible affair between the lodger and Elizabeth, which are totally unfounded, apparently.
Absolutely. It was said that people started talking, saying that she was seen around town with Pascoe, and he was frequenting the Woolcock house when Thomas was at work. She was also then seen, so that started a bit of gossip that they were seeing each other, and when she was going to chemists seeking some medication, it was when someone suggested that she was trying to get the medication to poison her husband and run away with her lover.
So that was the basic grounds for her arrest, was it?
It was after, it was on the 4th of September when the doctor didn't sign the certificate, the death certificate. It was actually Thomas Woolcock's cousin, Beth Snell, who suggested to the doctor that there might have been a bit of foul play, and she called him to say she wanted a full investigation into her cousin's death. And that's when he then spoke to Elizabeth, and an inquest was then taken in the front of their parlour, in the front of the Woolcock cottage. Throughout the inquest, they actually decided to open up Thomas Woolcock's body and do some examination. So they did a post-mortem there in the house, and that's when the doctors said that there was an extensive amount of mercury found in his body. And so subsequently to that, and with some of the influence from what the doctors were saying and the chemists, it went to trial at the Supreme Court in December.
She certainly didn't get a fair trial in any way, shape or form, did she?
No, she actually had a defence lawyer, Dr. Kaufman. He was new to Adelaide. He was new to Australia. He was actually from, finished the bar in London, but he came from Guyana. And so he had a very strange accent. It's sort of a Dutch, English mixture, mixed language. And he was very hard to understand. He'd only had two cases prior to, a couple of cases, and they were petty theft or property disputes. So this was his first major case. He was up against the Queen Counsel, who was Richard Andrews, and he had actually been an ex-politician and an Attorney General prior to being QC. So he had a lot of power and a very influential person. And so no one stood a chance, really. He, in his statement, had the whole thing worked out, the whole story about the affair, killing the dog as a trial to killing her husband. He thought she was an astute woman for thinking like this, whereas the defence was trying to say that she wasn't astute. She was a simple girl, and most of the medications could be, asked for over the counter. However, it was after the Queen's Counsel, Richard Andrews, spoke. He had the whole story, as I said. He called 32 witnesses, some claiming that they saw Elizabeth treat Thomas with poison, and most of this was after August, and which is a very interesting thing because the mercury should have been in his system prior to August. As Dr. Herbert claimed, in August, that's when he had the mercury poisoning. So any medication he was given after that time was actually probably just prescribed by the doctor.
Right. Some witnesses on her behalf testified that by all accounts, she had cared for Thomas very well over the time that he was sick.
Absolutely. Through the post-mortem, they actually examined the body and it had no bed sores at all. So anyone that's trying to kill their husband probably wouldn't be cleaning them either. So that was the other thing that seems a bit odd in this case.
Yes. And she wasn't allowed to speak on her own behalf either.
She wasn't, no. She had a small statement at the inquest, and even that was sort of declined from any further trial.
Right. And so the jury came back, obviously with a guilty verdict, but they asked for not to have the death penalty because of her age. She was only 25 at the time.
Yeah. What happened there, they took 25 minutes to deliberate after hearing Richard Andrews' final summary. They took 25 minutes to come up with a plea of guilty, but a plea for mercy on account of her youth. That plea then goes to the Governor Musgrave and in the executive committee, and with that, they basically voted whether they believed she was guilty or not, and it was actually a verdict of 3-1. It was Treasurer Lavington Glyde that believed that she might not be guilty.
Right.
But they went ahead.
And why do you think the judge overturned the or disregarded the jury's asking for her not to get the death penalty? Why do you think he decided that at that time, in your opinion?
The judge was okay with providing the recommendation. He was the one that took it to the Executive Council.
Okay, so who would actually overturn the decision and sentence to death?
Yeah. Okay. So the judge hands the decision to the governor. It's up to the governor. He's the only one with power to overturn any sort of sentence like that. It's interesting because the Governor Musgrave, was always against any mercy pleas. He'd actually not allowed several other mercy pleas prior to this and also after this. He believed in not shaking the justice system. If someone was convicted at a trial by judge and jury, he thought they've done their job. We should allow it to go forward based on that. He didn't want to interfere.
And the first woman ever to be sentenced to death by hanging in South Australia.
He's the only one in South Australia, yes.
And even since then, yeah.
Yeah. There was another person who was hanged, the only woman hanged in Queensland, and interestingly enough, she was hanged. It was only a few years after Elizabeth, and she had 2 mercy pleas. She pleaded twice to the governor at the time for mercy, and twice he declined. And that governor was Governor Musgrave.
Oh, okay. Okay. And obviously the hanging went through, and Elizabeth was buried between the inner and outer walls of the old Adelaide jail.
That's correct, yes.
Yep. And people are still bringing flowers to her, or they did for many years. Is that still happening today?
They still do, yeah. People leave flowers.
Lovely, isn't it?
It is. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of questions here from subscribers, if you don't mind answering them.
Certainly. Absolutely. Okay.
Well, from Twisted Sister, she asked if the conviction is overturned on a new petition, will Elizabeth's remains be removed from the prison?
That's up to,
of course,
someone other than me, but good question. She's in unhallowed ground, so she should be. In fact, Dad and I, when we first put a petition in a few years ago in 2011, the Moonta mayor, the mayor from Moonta, said that he would be happy to have the bodies exhumed and taken to Moonta. However, I don't think that's really where her body should remain anyway. So it's a hard decision what to do there.
It
But
is. No.
it
Yeah.
would be nice for her to have a proper resting place. Yes.
Yes, yes. And then there's always the question, should we just let her rest in peace, you know?
That's correct. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one that'll be answered if and when it comes to it.
Absolutely.
Another subscriber, Mad Maxine, asked, does Elizabeth have any living descendants?
She didn't actually have children, although the stepson, Thomas John, we finally found he did marry. He ended up going to Charters Towers in Queensland. He married and had 5 children, and he died at 46, I believe, in 1909.
Okay, so there could possibly be great nieces and nephews out there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay. And Scully B124 did ask a question that's already been answered, actually. Why do you think the death penalty went ahead despite the jury's asking for it not to? So we've kind of covered that one as well, I hope, for you, Scully B.
Yep.
And you're actually working on a new petition, is that right?
I am on a new book at the moment. And if all goes well, yes, possibly another petition and another posthumous pardon. If this gets the acknowledgement, and I think, I believe that there's more information that I really need to focus in on that we could take to the governor again and the Attorney General and get this overturned.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope third time lucky with that one.
Absolutely.
And obviously, I don't want to go into the details because you've got a book coming up, as you said, which will be very interesting to read. But that's based on, obviously, the Mercury and other people's opinions of that time. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Also, a little bit more background into who Elizabeth is and a lot of the other people who played a part in her life, including Dr. Bull. He's a very interesting character, and how he actually he was actually a drug addict himself and suicided soon after Elizabeth's execution. So whether he felt guilty or not, that's another story, but there were several other very interesting things that happened after she was executed to all of those that played a part in her demise.
Okay. He's Thomas with Mercury, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. It's a fascinating story and a very sad one, which I think, makes people want to know more. And you're actually giving a talk for the Fluoro History Group next month at Christie's Beach. Is that right?
That's correct. It's all part of History Week, 2:30 to 3:30 at the Uniting Church Hall in William Road, Christie's Beach.
Okay.
So a whole talk explaining all of this information and a little bit more detail.
Okay. And is that open to the public, Leeza?
It is, yes.
Okay. Well, I'll put the details beneath the video as well in the comments section. Yep, and that in your dad's book, and some of the stage play that you wrote and directed. Tell us a little bit about that.
Interesting. It was after Dad's first book, I wrote and produced A Hanging Conclusion. It had a cast of 30, and we performed that at the Adelaide Jail. And from that, 2 busloads came down from Moonta, including the mayor, and he suggested we have it for the Kernowick Cornish Festival in 1997. And I actually had to rewrite the whole play to have a cast of 10 to take up to Moonta for the festival, which ended up being a sellout season throughout the program. I, again, wrote and produced that. The interesting thing was a few years later, in 2004, they did a mock trial at the Adelaide Jail, and that was part of Law Week. And as I was there setting up an artwork that I produced for Elizabeth, and then I heard that the person who was going to perform as Elizabeth on that day called in sick. strangely enough, I couldn't find any other actors to perform as her. So I ended up being Elizabeth in that mock trial, which was really quite eerie and haunting.
It would be.
Yeah, after knowing so much about her and then to perform her. It was a fascinating insight because the whole trial was recreated with actors as it was back then. And however, the law students, the students were listening to this, and a retired judge all came up with a verdict that she would have been not guilty for various reasons. And there was not enough evidence to convict her.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all very informative, and you've filled a lot of people in with details that perhaps if they come across it on Google or something like that, or even YouTube, my videos, your videos, they may not realise the depth of what sort of life she had, or
That's right.
how unfair the trial was, and how very young she was.
Absolutely, yes. There's so much more to it than people realise.
Yes, they don't put a face to a name, if you like, and I think that's what we need to do in cases like this. And obviously, you and your dad have a personal spot for this particular story.
We do. We've introduced her to the family. She's
Yes.
part of the family now.
That's a lovely thing. It really is a lovely thing, and I hope that when you do get your petition up and running and the book's out and available for people to purchase, you might come back and speak to us again about that.
Absolutely. Very happy to.
That would be wonderful. All right. Well, I thank you very much for your time. As I said, I'll leave all the links underneath. There's some YouTube links to your stage play, your dad's book, and I've also included a Facebook link to your Elizabeth Woolcock Facebook page.
Yep, lovely.
Yep, and hopefully we'll speak to you again when everything's up and running and we can push this petition a little bit further, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yep, love to.
Lovely. Well, I do appreciate your time. I know you're a busy person, and you're our very first guest that we've had on our very first live. And
what an honour.
I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Kim. Lovely chatting with you. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. So just to recap, the link for Bass Publishing to find the book by Elizabeth Peters, Dead Woman Walking, is below in the comments section. There are also links to Leeza's stage play, Shadows of Death, and a link to the Facebook page, Elizabeth Woolcock, as well as the Fluoro History Group, where Leeza will be speaking in May. So that would be a very interesting thing to visit if you're down that way. And I thank you for watching and taking part in our very first live, and hopefully we'll have many more coming up. Thanks for watching.